When someone is getting ready to share the news, they're in a very vulnerable place, and the response from the manager really needs to feel genuine, authentic, supported, and like a relief and also an excitement, because that's going to mark the beginning of the next stage of their life, really, whether it's their first child or their fourth. It's going to be a completely different experience going through the leave journey and returning with this additional child or children if they're having multiples. And so that manager needs to say, congratulations, and mean it, and know that the company has actually set up structure in place to make sure that the manager is set up for success, the team is set up for success, and that things will continue to run effectively, efficiently without that person there. And the expecting parent needs to have the psychological safety that their job will be there. So that needs to be part of it. It's not just congratulations. It's we've got you. We have a system in place just for this. It's not a surprise. You're not the first person to welcome a child. So, we're going to be in touch about next steps. Who else have you told? How do you want to share this with the team? What feels right for you? And we can't wait to welcome you back. And we're going to plan for your return before you leave.
Welcome to Manager, the podcast built on the idea that managers learn best from other managers. I'm Kamaria Scott, creator of Manager Momentum and your host. In each episode, I chat with people leaders about what it's really like to support teams, achieve results, and grow in an increasingly complex role. This is your place to hear how managers handle challenges and what's actually working for them in the real world. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Manager, where we talk about what it's like to really lead every day. Today's episode is for every manager who's ever wondered, how do I support someone returning from parental leave without overstepping or underdelivering? Or maybe what's my role in helping them reintegrate with confidence, clarity, and care? We don't talk about this enough, but as a people leader, we can make or break someone's return to work experience. So I am very excited to introduce you to today's guest, Arianna Hillis, a seasoned leader and owner of Shoshana's Daughter. Her perspective is very personal and highly practical because she's not only lived this experience, but she's built a framework around it. So I'm very excited for you to get to know her and to learn a little bit more about what you can do to make return to work a gratifying and wonderful experience for people on your team. So Arianna, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here and having this important conversation today.
I am excited. So if you would, I know I gave people a little bit of introduction to you, but would you tell them a little bit about yourself and the business that you have and why this is so important to you?
Absolutely. So my company is Shoshana's Daughter. We partner directly with birthing and non-birthing parents and help coach them through their parental leave journey as they are preparing for leave, during, and returning. But we also work with employers as an employer benefit where they can sponsor the coaching for their people and also supporting their managers as well. How I got here is it's kind of a meandering path. I was actually in real estate for about 15 years. I started selling real estate at a very young age, absolutely loved it, got my broker's license. And then I was recruited to take over an underperforming real estate office for one of the biggest brokerage houses in the San Francisco Bay Area. They were a franchise. They had 36 offices, and this was like 35 on the list, I think. And morale was down. They didn't have a ton of agents. Agents were leaving. The space was also just kind of dark and dreary. And it was like, no one wants to work here. What is going on? Oh my gosh, let me put my touch on this place. So I ended up turning the office around. It was still, for where the office was located, the agents were selling like lower priced real estate. So it wasn't ever one of like the top performing offices, just as far as like sales volume coming out. However, I did end up becoming the top recruiter in the company all 3 years that I was there. And we ended up having close to 80 agents. And when I started, there was like 20. We also went through a major brand transition during that time. And while other offices were losing their agents, I only lost one. And I think they were on their way out anyway. So I was really big on creating a really fun and engaging weekly team meeting So people would come to those. I had quotes of the week. I was a goofball. I had guest speakers. It was a lot of fun. And I also sat with everybody. I know there was like two private offices, and I always sat in the bullpen with all my people. I gave the private offices to my top producers, and it was on a rotating basis. And like, if you didn't hit your numbers, you had to move out and someone else moved in. And it was during that time that I started doing accountability groups and coaching cohorts with those agents. And we didn't just talk about business and like, how do you want to grow your business and what activities are you going to do to grow your business? But it was what's going on in your personal life that you're comfortable sharing. Where are some areas of improvement in your relationships? If you have children, how do you want to improve that? Your health, your physical activity, and really looking at it from a mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual standpoint. And I later built those into what I call the 4 pillars. And so it was in these cohorts that I would run for a quarter that I just found this love for coaching and seeing people transform their lives. And that's kind of like where it all began. I took that experience. I then started my own real estate and property management company. It was acquired 3 years after I started it. And during all of that time, we did have people that started families, were growing their families, and I hadn't yet had children, but I saw how difficult it was for people to balance, especially for the birthing parent, the physical toll that it takes on the body and how each pregnancy and recovery and return to work would look different. And so in the real estate world, people are independent contractors for the most part. So they're not employees. They can take as much time as they want. They can work on their business however they want. They don't have to come into the office. So this is all pre-COVID, obviously. And in some ways, the model of hybrid, has been in the real estate world for so many years. And it was, again, having my own company that I really love to have groups and inspire people to live their best lives. And that included and changed as people added and grew their family. So that's where it all started. Fast forward after the acquisition of my company, I kind of went the corporate route and I worked for a startup. I was employee number one. I met my husband. Wild story. Sad story because the company eventually went bankrupt after 9 years. And that was, really sad. But in my experience of becoming a mother while working in corporate 3 times over, I didn't have a great manager. And I was used to being the one managing others. And so I was always flexible. I think I was a good employee. I didn't, flexible, like, I wouldn't do things that way, sir. But it was really interesting to be on the other side of it now and being managed and seeing how disorganized my manager was. And even just receiving the news that I was expecting was not what I was expecting. And in joining mom groups during my maternity leaves, I realized other moms also had interesting, I'll say, stories of how their managers received the news. Some horrible stories, like, yeah, I thought you might be expecting you've gained a lot of weight recently, or
No.
oh, yeah. So you're having a baby. Okay. When's your due date? You could be honest. Do you really think you're going to come back to work? When's the first day of your vacation? And everybody's journey to parenthood looks different.
Yes.
Some people go through adoption, surrogacy, IVF, lost pregnancies. So to get to the point where you can feel comfortable announcing that the baby that is going to be born is viable and you're hoping for everyone to be healthy at the end of this, like, that is a really vulnerable place for a birthing or non-birthing parent to be. As a manager, it is so important to get that moment right.
Yes.
Because I feel like that actually paves the way for the rest of it. They may make a decision, whether they know it or not, in that moment, based on how their manager responds to this news.
That is so true. And I think about in the teams that I've led, finding out that they were having a baby and the conversations we have about that. And even again, to your point, as someone who is also a mother, thinking about navigating how do I manage bringing this life into the world, the time I'm going to have to take off. It's a lot of stress for people on teams. It is absolutely a vulnerable moment. It's so interesting because I don't know that a lot of people leaders think about the impact that they can have on somebody just through their reaction and to the lead up to them leaving. And so I'm thinking about, again, someone on my team announcing that she was pregnant. Right away, I think our brains go to the work. I'll be honest and candid, right? Because you're like, oh no, I'm good. Especially the person's high performing, and you're like, they're going to be out for however many time, and you want to have this very human response, but we're always, balancing relationships and results in our role. So I know that instinctually our brains might go there, but we have to slow ourselves down and say, okay, but to lean into the relationship aspect of being a people leader, the work will take care of itself. I have to take care of my employee. So I find out someone on my team is expecting, let's rewind your experience with your own people leader. What would good have looked like? So if we could take you back years and you're walking into his office and you're telling him, hey, great news, I'm expecting. What are the things that we should be doing from that moment until somebody gets ready to go on leave?
Great question. It should just be genuine congratulations first and foremost. And, this may sound silly, but manager training is also really important because this news is going to continue to come up. People are going to continue to work and have children. It's inevitable. So, training managers on response and planning really goes a long way. So, the way that a genuine congratulations can come across is if they've done some role play, if they have a plan that they feel good about, that they know is going to work, they're going to feel better about it and can genuinely say, congratulations. And how do you want to share the news? Is there anyone else that you've told on the team? So asking them, how do they want to announce this? Because I have a story about that. How do they want to announce this? Do they want to have some type of celebration to mark this momentous occasion? And then let them know we've got you. When someone is getting ready to share the news, they're in a very vulnerable place. And the response from the manager really needs to feel genuine, authentic, supported, a relief, and also an excitement, because that's going to mark the beginning of the next stage of their life, really, whether it's their first child or their fourth. It's going to be a completely different experience going through the leave journey and returning with this additional child or children if they're having multiples. And so that manager needs to say, congratulations, and mean it, and know that the company has actually set up structure in place to make sure that the manager is set up for success, the team is set up for success, and that things will continue to run effectively, efficiently without that person there. And the expecting parent needs to have the psychological safety that their job will be there. So that needs to be part of it. It's not just congratulations. It's we've got you. We have a system in place just for this. It's not a surprise. You're not the first person to welcome a child. So, we're going to be in touch about next steps. Who else have you told? How do you want to share this with the team? What feels right for you? And we can't wait to welcome you back. And we're going to plan for your return before you leave.
I love that. I love it for a couple of reasons. One of the things that I always share with people leaders is when you think about recognition, we always think about, recognition being, oh, you've hit some work milestone, you've done some project really well. But a really good people leader, when they're thinking about recognition, recognizes moments, progress, and milestones and special events. And thinking about, and not just the ones that are work related, but the ones that happen in people's personal lives too, because people are bringing their whole selves to work. Thinking about with your team, are those types of things that you want to actually be celebrating? Meaning, yes, we want to celebrate when people get married. Yes, we want to celebrate when people have babies. Yes, we want to celebrate when someone's kid graduates from college. We want to celebrate that too, because we recognize that people are humans doing the work. And what I hear from you is there's a conscious shift that when someone is like, I'm expecting a baby, that we have to stop thinking about like, what can that person do for us as an organization? But like, how can we as an organization support them through what's happening in their life? Because we want that reciprocity. We want people to feel like as much as I am contributing, I need support in my company and my manager is here to support me as well.
And I think it's important for, I don't know if it's managers going to HR, if there's any HR leaders listening, but it kind of comes from the top down because managers are employees too, right? You're an employee first as a manager, and you need to feel supported as a manager, you need to be set up for success. And if you feel like you have that from a company level, you can then do a better job supporting your people, your expecting parents when you get this news. So I think that that's also really important is to remember that. And if you don't feel like you're getting that, speak up and say something. If you have ideas, go to HR about it, go to your leadership and brainstorm. And I find that a lot of managers do different things. Some managers do things really well. It's like their superpower, creating SOPs. And then other managers are like, I hate that. I use Chat GPT. It gives me a nice template and I work from there. Everybody has their strengths. And so if there's a manager in your organization, for example, that seems to really get it right when it comes to accepting this kind of news, having the right response, taking their people through a process as they're preparing for leave and welcoming people back, it's not a bad idea for you to maybe get with that other manager and maybe even take it up to HR and say, hey, we want to create some best practices around this because it's going to continue to happen.
Yeah.
And we want to be set up. I think you can also learn from things that have not gone well of what not to do. So whether it's something you have seen or experienced yourself, or if it's another manager in your organization or not, bringing that to the table for conversation, saying this is not, we don't want people to leave. I was working with a client just recently and they brought me in after they had one expecting parent about to go out on leave. And they just got news that someone who had just returned from leave was now leaving the company because her manager coming back basically just dumped all of her work back on her. And there was no tiered plan or phased return to work. And she was just like, I can't do this. I'm overwhelmed as a new mom and stepping into work. So that's something to consider as well.
Let's talk about that a little bit, though, because we did a bit of a rewind on what good looks like when we're getting ready to go out on leave. But now we're coming back from leave. And so what does good look like? And I do want to assume that, let's say an organization does have a full on process, but I know from my experience as a people leader, right there's part of me to exactly what you said. I have to go to my HR person and go, okay, wait, what am I supposed to do? There is the policy part of that. But like you also said, there's my personal leadership aspect of it as well. I might be really good at tapping into it. Maybe somebody isn't great. So just from what's within my control as a people leader, when someone comes back to my team, what might good look like in terms of welcoming somebody back?
Part of welcoming someone back begins, the planning piece of that begins before they leave. So a few things to think about is a transition action plan. So we have a templated guide that walks both the manager and the employee through that. So create your own if you'd like, but take into consideration what are their roles, responsibilities, and tasks now, and what do you expect it to look like when they return, knowing that it's a living document and that it can change, and build in a review time for both the manager and the team, but also the parent, maybe while they're still on leave. And this can be really helpful because that's when things can change. We had a riff and now the team is different. And when you come back, you're actually going to be reporting to someone else. It's nice for parents to hear that before they return to digest that information. It also may change how they feel about returning and they have a right to know. So that's also why a keep in touch strategy can also be part of your overall strategy of preparing someone, of finding out how can we contact you if you want to be contacted? Is that text, phone, personal email? What information can we contact you about? I find you don't want to know the water cooler tea, but like maybe you want to know if, your account that you've been managing for 10 years churns, or there's some challenges with them, or they expand your account, or someone on the team leaves voluntarily or involuntarily. So having the parent set those boundaries and parameters, knowing that it's flexible and it can be changed, that could be really helpful. Then also another really fun thing to do is to assign them a keep in touch buddy. So like a gatekeeper that everything can filter to and through. And as they're returning to work, this person can also be their return to work buddy and just help them. It takes about 4 months to be fully integrated back after you return from leave. So yes, having like a few weeks where you can have a return to work that maybe it's part-time, maybe it's hybrid if it's eventually going to be in office 5 days a week, but being flexible and really listening to what the employee wants, or even proactively offering flexibility, I think is really important. There's this one manager that I was working with, and it was a hybrid situation. So on the days where the employee was working from home, she said, look, from 11 to 1, I don't want to see you online. I don't expect you to respond to an email or take a meeting. I want you to take that time to play with your baby, nurse your baby, put your baby down for its nap, have some lunch for yourself, close your eyes for 30 minutes if you want. I do not expect to hear from you until you feel like you don't need that protected time. I want you to take it.
Yes.
And that employee later found out that her manager offering that flexibility, having that grace, is actually what retained that person. That person was considering leaving, thinking, I don't know that I can do this.
Yes.
But just seeing that the leadership offered that, those kinds of moments go such a long way and serve a lot of dividends.
And I can imagine, again, having been through it, these are things that sometimes people don't even think to ask for. They don't feel comfortable asking for it. They think that when they get back to work, it's supposed to be business as usual. But as we know, when people are trying to navigate the early days of having a baby, it's not business as usual. You're not sleeping as much. You're hoping that they're on a sleep schedule by the time they come back, but they might need that extra bit of flexibility and they may be afraid to ask for it. We do talk a lot about how parents, when they have children, I think you mentioned it, are afraid of that demotion. They're afraid that they're going to be perceived as not being able to do all the things that they could do before. And so proactively asking, what support might you need, or what flexibility might you need, or you know what, I've noticed that this is really helpful. Is that something that you might find helpful as well? Opens that door for a good conversation, because also it's not one size fits all. There might be people who don't need that flexibility, but it's the ask and the curiosity that really bridges that relationship, that helps have a productive conversation about that. So I love that you brought that up.
The other thing to be aware of, so there's, I'm sure I didn't coin this phrase, but like boomerang leaves, where someone comes back from a parental leave and they are overwhelmed for a multitude of reasons, and they end up having to leave on a medical leave because of mental health reasons. And that breaks my heart more than anything, because I feel like not all times, but sometimes that's preventable. We know that 1 in 5 birthing parents are going to experience some form of anxiety or mood disorder. We know that 1 in 10 non-birthing parents are going to experience the same thing, but it presents 3 to 6 months after the baby arrives, and the symptoms are different. So if you know that there's these milestone moments where mental health is going to come into play, what can you as a leader do to step up and offer additional support is really important.
You mentioned that both a birthing and non-birthing parent can start feeling overwhelmed at milestones after the baby is born. What are some of the things I should be looking out for? So if I am sort of scanning my team, I'm making sure that everybody is healthy. What are some of the things that I'm going to be looking at that will cue to me that maybe it's time to have another conversation, or do just a check-in on my team to say, okay, I feel like something might not be right, or I feel like you might need some support. Let's have a conversation. What are the things I'm looking for?
Yeah, I think preemptively and proactively starting that so it doesn't seem maybe off putting when they're in it. So just kind of like breadcrumbing the conversation, I think is the most helpful. And then you can revisit it if you're noticing symptoms or reminding people of the resources that the company has. So for moms, for birthing parents, it's probably going to be fatigue. You're going to see it on their face. It's if they're maybe not putting themselves together like they used to, their hair, their makeup, if they're presenting differently, if their energy is different in meetings and interactions, if you're noticing more typos in their work, if they're stumbling over their words, if they're slurring their speech, if they're stuttering, they're not intoxicated, they're sleep deprived.
Yes.
There's those kinds of things going on. So those are, I would say, the telltale signs for non-birthing parents and dads. It could be feeling some form of aggression if they're maybe a little short or curt in their tone in messages or emails or during meetings, if they seem to have less patience for things, if they're leaving work or kind of checking out offline a little bit earlier than they usually would, if they're disengaging, if they're not going to the team offsites, any in-person events, things like that. Those would be more of the symptoms that you might see 3 to 6 months after the baby arrives. And this is if you have an EAP, it would be great to remind them of those services and don't just say, let me know if you want. Provide all the information. I know that 1 in 10 dads, I know that 1 in 5 moms might be feeling X, Y, and Z. I just wanted to remind you of this resource because we care and we're here. I'm always here to have a conversation. If you want to talk to HR, we're here for a conversation. And just that outreach can go such a long way for them to feel seen as a human being and to acknowledge that they are going through something, whether they want to talk to you about it or not. They are. That's really important. That's also where some, external resources can come in as well.
And I think, we always kind of go back and forth on like, what is the role of the manager? And I always see it as sort of being this information hub, even though that information is widely available within an organization. I think we are sort of like the intersection of scanning what is happening with our teams because when we're going through something and I'll admit this, I'm the last person to know sometimes when I'm going through something and it takes an outside person to just go, hey, I noticed that you're normally this and this and I see a little bit of change. Have you thought about an external resource or I just want to remind you that we have these resources. And so it's not necessarily for us to always have the answers, but to know and be aware of what resources are available in the organization and be scanning our teams to know, looking for those signs that something has changed and maybe point them or nudge them in the right direction when it may not be self evident to them. So I love that you brought that up. Just the knowing what's available to people. And then if there's not something available, having that conversation upward to say, hey, this is what I'm seeing on my team. As you mentioned, like HR, this is what I'm seeing on my team. What can we do to create resources or to have the partnerships that we need so that I can recommend them to my team or I can, help somebody who's going through this situation. So I think it is that kind of unique role of being in the middle of both the organization and the person, the team member, and playing almost like traffic director to what they might need to be successful.
Definitely. And some other things that we haven't really touched on is mentorship and finding other parents in your organization that are willing to be mentors for the folks with the littles because they're at a place like we were having a conversation previously where you have an older child that has had similar challenges to one of my children. And for you to say, like, there's light at the end of the tunnel, here's what it could look like 10 years from now, like that gives me hope and that makes me feel seen and heard as a mom going through something, and that's so important. And so if you can create that, that's building your culture. That is and employees that feel like they have connection, and it doesn't have to be within the same department or on the same team, but to find other employees that want to step into some leadership role and say, hey, I've been there, I want to give back to other moms and dads. That's such a gift that you can give. And also, if there's like a parent ERG, or you're thinking you might want to start one, or you're going to suggest to HR, like, hey, let's do this, or maybe there is one, but it's kind of gone cold. What could we do to pump some fresh energy into it? That's actually one of my favorite things to do. Is there's one that's kind of dying on the vine to come in just for a few weeks and give some new, fresh content and start some new conversation. Also, recruit some new members to it. That can also be a really helpful thing to do. So looking within your own organization and finding people that want to step up and give back and connect over being a working parent, because it's tough, but it's also really rewarding. And oftentimes people are going to find themselves as a working parent. They have to be a dual income household or
Yes.
more sometimes. That's not
Yes.
going to change.
And we're going to be leading working parents. And I can think of all of my teams, and there's no team that I've led that didn't have working parents. There's no team that I've led that hasn't had someone go out and have a baby. And so you're starting at various points in that journey with people, but it is that balance of making it possible for them to do both things and to think about what does that look like. We're sort of past the maternity point, but on my teams, it was common for someone to be like, "I'm on this team meeting. I'm not on camera because I'm driving to doing drop off or doing pickup," and that was completely fine. That was completely fine to say, "You have that flexibility. If you can hear us and that's fine with you, it's fine with us." Giving people that flexibility to know that they are going to have to do both, and that sometimes there's an intersection. And overarchingly, whether it's just starting off with leave or other things that happen along the journey, part of it is just the mindset of being a people leader who understands that there really isn't a clean separation between work and life. Most times when people are going off on maternity leave, we definitely are like, do not bother them unless they give us permission. But we shut off their work email because they're officially on leave. But that's probably one of the only times where there's like a hard separation. Other times it's very blurred. And so what I hear in everything that you're saying is that there's a mindfulness required of us to just know that there's complexity to being a working parent. And as a people leader, we have to just keep that in mind and keep conversations going to know when we have to flex one way or the other to make sure that we're creating balance and a healthy relationship between the organization and the people that report to us.
Absolutely. I think a fun way also, side note, if you're struggling for ways to think about like, I do want to be flexible. I do want to offer support and ideas, but I don't know what to think of to offer my people and what's going to be meaningful to them is see if HR is open to actually doing an anonymous survey to parent employees in the organization or within a particular department and ask them again anonymously, but like, have you had a leave here? What worked well? What were some challenges? What could we have done better? Or if you had a leave at another organization, what worked well? What were some challenges? What could have been better? What would have been helpful? What do you wish you were offered? What could your manager have done or offered? And like just crowdsource
Hmm.
ideas. And through that, you'll be able to filter through and see trends and see what's most important to everyone. And then that can be a really great list to essentially offer and say, hey, of these things, we can offer you this. Let me know if any of this sounds interesting to you. I know with one client, the mom was getting some anxiety as it was like ticking towards her 1 month return to work. And she thought, oh my gosh, there's so much now to do around the house, cleaning bottles and extra laundry and doctor's appointments and more food prep. And I have to prep things for myself more because I'm nursing. And so I actually asked her, I said, would having one work from home day until your baby is 1 years old be helpful? And she was
Hmm.
like, her mind was blown. She's like, oh my gosh, that would be a game changer for me. Yeah, that would be helpful. So then I was actually able to go to her manager because we had the relationship. And I said, I think this would really be helpful for this mom. Is this something the company could get behind for a year? And they're like, we've never done that before, but like, let me go to HR, let me figure it out. And the answer was yes. And when I went back to that mom and said, guess what? You got it. And you can pick the day. She was over the moon. She was so excited to go back to work. She felt so supported by her company. And we now know that during the next 12 months that she gets that one work from home day, she's probably not going to be looking for another job. And that's when they're most at risk for leaving is in their first 12 months back of like, is this going to work for me? Is this role going to work? Is my manager going to work? Is the company going to work for me? Because my values have changed. My
Yeah.
identity has changed. And that's when you really want to like woo them and re-recruit them and give them all the extra support. So I think crowdsourcing some ideas of how to be flexible and offering additional support can be helpful.
That's really helpful, and I love that you said that the identity can shift. That's a conversation that my mom friends and I have all the time about the identity shift of becoming a parent. It's a lot. So what I love is that we talked about what's within a manager's scope of responsibility and what they can personally do to welcome a team member back and make sure the experience of bringing a child into the world is something that's beneficial and mutually beneficial for them in the organization. But as we both know, managers also operate within the organizational constraints. So, what are some of the things, some of the tips for HR and organizations that they can do to support managers in and having the best impact on their team members? So, from an HR organizational perspective, what are some of the best practices that If I'm a manager and I don't have it, what should I go ask them to go do?
Yeah, similarly to asking parents what they need, I think as a people leader, as a manager, you need to speak up for what you need. And if you're finding a trend or you're talking with your peers and you're hearing grumblings of everyone wishes X, Y, or Z or thinks X, Y, and Z is not very flexible or forward thinking and or innovative as an organization, like, someone can be the squeaky wheel, and, maybe put a plan together. I think it really depends on the industry. It depends on the size of the organization, how many levels there are in the org chart, and how empowered you feel. But I think HR appreciates hearing from people that have a respectful and well delivered communication, especially if there's a trend or a history of something being of concern for leaders. They need to hear about it. Otherwise, it becomes a business problem and people are going to start leaving. Not just managers are going to start to turn
Yeah.
over, but people on their teams are as well.
So should I be asking for like a repeatable process, a policy? What are the best practices that organizations can have that support both the managers and their teams during this time?
Definitely some type of template for transitioning work, because that's the biggest thing. People,
Hmm.
and also considering, I know a lot of companies would say we don't have the budget for that, but infilling a position for an interim time. Because is this work going to be taken on by the manager with someone leaving? Is it going to be distributed to the existing team? Is that going to lead to more burnout? And then people are going to leave, and it would have just been cheaper to bring in some temporary support. So, thinking about your role, the people that are on your team, and the function that they have in the organization, do you need to advocate for someone to come in and fill that role temporarily? What is going to be best for your team and for yourself so that everyone is not burnt out? Your team and the people on it for the work that they're going to transition. What does that look like for everyone to be the most successful? I think also if HR can put together a supplemental handbook specifically for parental leave and all of the resources available, to say to an expecting parent, all of the information's in the handbook, start reading on page 112. Their eyes are going to glaze over. They're going to be bounced around to different resources. If you can give them just a dedicated resource in layman's terms of like what they get and the steps, and also not necessarily a flow chart, but like next steps. Like this is
Yeah.
what HR put something together that we can clearly say these are the next steps for managers and these are the next steps for the team and the expecting parents. And then if there are requests or accommodations that you think would be helpful, asking HR to maybe put a policy around and say these are all approved. So if any of your people ask for any of these things, just say yes. You don't need to come to us. We've already thought about it.
I love that because I think decisioning is one of the pain points for managers. Decisions can I make? So you mentioned like, can I approve my person working from home for a year? Do I need to come to you for that? So clarity and decision making, I think, is really important. So I want to thank you for bringing that up. This has been such an interesting conversation. I definitely wish I knew you many years ago when I had team members who were welcoming their littles into the world, because there's a lot to figure out along the way because it's not something that happens all the time. It kind of happens intermittently, and so having that little bit of support is so helpful. If people want to reach out to you, managers who may have questions or might even want some coaching, is LinkedIn the best way to do that?
Yeah, you can find me, Arianna Hillis, on LinkedIn. My website is shoshanasdaughter.com. You can also just book a complimentary call with me there if you wanted to. This was interesting and sparked something in you and you want to have a conversation, let's do it.
I love that. Well, on behalf of the listeners, I want to thank you for your time and your expertise today. Again, I feel like I learned a lot, even though I've done this before. Still, there's things I didn't think about that I was like, oh, you know what? Actually, I love a return to work, but it's a great idea. So I learned a lot today. And for you listeners, I think what I would love for you to take away from this is that there are many circumstances that we encounter as people leaders that require us to make sure that our team members are treated with care and that they are confident in their ability to navigate both their personal life and their professional life. And so I do hope that you picked up some tips that you can use with your own teams. And that if you are great at this and someone in your community is not, you can maybe share with them what your best practices are. So I want to thank Ariana again for her time today and ask you all to take care of yourselves and each other until we see each other again on Manager to Manager.